Welcome back to Hannity. So in the past few days, Hillary Clinton has been out in full force touting herself as a champion of women's rights. But aside from the Clinton Foundation accepting money from foreign donors who have horrible women's rights records, well, the Washington Free Beacon has a new report out that details a list of various ways that Hillary Clinton has, in fact, mistreated women associated with her husband, Bill. Now, my next guest says that Hillary is the war on women and that she has even orchestrated a, quote, terror campaign against some, including her. Joining me now, Kathleen Willey, former Clinton White House volunteer. Kathleen, it's been a long time. Good to see you.
It has been a long time. And all I can say is deja vu all over again, as Yogi Berra says.
Really?
Here we go again.
All right, let's just remind our audience a little bit about Hillary's recent advocacy, the great champion of women's rights, and I want you to tell your story. Here's what she's been saying.
One recent report on the gender pay gap in the Valley found that a woman with a bachelor's degree here tends to make 60% less than a man with the same degree. I know there are still some people who roll their eyes when I or others say that women's issues are America's issues, but they're just going to have to get used to it. I'm going to beat this drum as long and loud as it takes. Today, we mark the progress that has been made in the 2 decades since the international community gathered in Beijing and declared with one voice that human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights. And my passion for this fight burns as brightly today as it did 20 years ago.
You know, Kathleen, she mentions the gender pay gap. She didn't mention that the Obama White House nor her office, when she was Secretary of State, paid women about 70+ cents of every dollar they paid a man. Why don't you tell us your story and how it relates to Hillary and remind people?
Well, my story is, obviously, I was assaulted by her husband in the Oval Office, and at a time that was a pretty dire time in my family's history, and I went to him for help because I was a friend of his, my husband was a friend of his, and at the time I was volunteering, and we had a serious financial crisis, and I went to him and I said, my volunteer days are over and I need your help with a job. And I don't mean a job here or in the White House or in Washington, anywhere in the government. And if you could find me a job in Richmond, where I live, that would be a big help. And I was upset at the time. I was visibly upset. It just, you know, it all bubbled up. And I had to do everything that I could to save my family. And he could see that I was upset. I was visibly upset and I was crying, and which I tried not to. But anyway, he said, well, I'm sorry to hear what's going on. Would you like a cup of coffee? And I said, sure. And so he ushered me back into another room where there was a little galley kitchen. And I noticed out of the corner of my eye that he kind of told the steward to get out of the way and leave. And I didn't pay any attention to that really at the time because I was focused on getting a job. And the next thing I knew, he said, let's go in here in my study where we can talk. Well, as I found out later, that was the famous study where he and Monica met. So anyway, he sat down and I was kind of leaning up against the door jamb and drinking coffee and telling him what was going on. And, you know, I just needed some help. I just needed a real paying job. And he acted like he was serious about it, and he was comforting me about it, and he I didn't want to take up a lot of his time, obviously, and I said, well, I better go, but I just want to let you know. And I asked him, and at that point I was walking out the door, trying to get out the door, and he just cornered me and had me backed into a corner. And without going into the details, if you want the details, you can read my book, Target, because I just don't like going through the details. It's pretty obvious. It was unwelcome and inappropriate and out of line. And I consider myself lucky to get out of there.
You say that Hillary is the war on women, and that has
Hillary's a war on women.
And that she orchestrated a terror campaign against women.
Absolutely.
Well, explain that part.
Well, I've talked to some of these women, and I've talked, when I was writing my book, the word got out, and I got calls from a number of women who insisted, and I promised that their names would be anonymous. I would, I would not disclose their names. And same story, over and over and over again. These women were terrorized. One woman was so terrorized, she left the country. They were afraid. A lot of the women, most of them, I was at the time single, so they really played on.
How was she, though, specifically involved? How was she involved? I get the bill part. What did she do?
She put it all into place. She had her attack dogs: Sidney Blumenthal, George Carville, all of these
James
people.
Carville,
She had, she had 3 of the best-known private investigators in the country on retainer. They were part of it. They know how to do it.
All right, let me ask you this.
They know exactly how to do it.
She's taken, the Clinton Foundation has taken all this money from countries like Saudi Arabia, Oman, Algeria, Qatar, the UAE, Kuwait, Brunei. And you look at it, we're putting up on the screen, Kathleen, the gender gap in terms of this is where they are ranked nationwide and how they treat women. In Saudi Arabia, women can't drive. They need male counterparts. And I'm just putting it up there. What is your take that she hasn't been critical? The champion of women's rights is taking tens of millions of dollars from countries that have abysmal rights records for women. And what is your take on that?
Well, it comes down to 2 things. It's real obvious. Everybody knows that money is the most important thing with the Clintons, period.
Do you think she's, in other words, she won't criticize them because the money's more important than the principle of standing up or being a champion for women?
Exactly. This business of being the women's advocate and the war on women attack on the Republicans is totally bogus. She's got a choice. If she either wants to further women's issues and advocate for women all over the world, but it's okay to look the other way when she takes all this money from these countries that abuse women. Right. So which is it? Is she going to take that money from them, or is she going to say, no, I'm not going to take that money from them because you treat these women terribly?
She took it and she doesn't criticize them. All right, Kathleen, thank you so much. Appreciate your time tonight.
You're welcome.